Tonight on Cold Case Hockey, 3 stories from the margins of hockey history. First, Charlie Simmer, a quiet superstar who may have been overlooked by the Hall of Fame. Then, the goalies who peaked early. Some hung on, others vanished, except here. And finally, the Minnesota Fighting Saints, who played hard, hit harder, and folded twice.
If Hollywood ever went looking for hockey stories, and it probably should, it wouldn't have to look far. Charlie Simmer's career has everything. The dizzying heights, the terrifying lows, the creamy middles, and it all happened in Hollywood's backyard. But the real story isn't the drama. It's how on earth the Kings plucked an unknown player, a farmhand, from the minors and turned him into a reliable, high-level goal scorer. Was it the system? Could just about anybody have played with Marcel Dionne and scored 50 goals? Or had there been more to Charlie Simmer than meets the eye all along? They say you can't teach size, but some coaches can't see past it. Charlie Simmer was drafted by the California Seals 39th overall in the 1974 draft. At 6'3", 210 pounds, he had size, and his junior numbers proved he had skill. What he didn't have was breakout speed, but that was okay. It was his size that was coveted. The Seals never really knew what they had in Charlie Simmer. This was a pattern within the organization. The Seals would yo-yo Simmer up and down from the Salt Lake Golden Eagles to the big club, teasing him with phantom opportunities. He would dress for a game with the Seals, but only get 1 or 2 shifts all night. They wanted him to be a checking forward. Then, they'd send him back down for not scoring. The situation proved discouraging. Simmer wanted to prove he wasn't just a fringe player. All he needed was a real chance. This went on for 3 years, even after the organization had left the Bay Area for Cleveland. It's not a value judgment to say that if the Seals had managed their talent better, they probably would have won more games and drawn more fans. But I digress. By the end of the 1977 season, the financial picture had gotten so bad for the Cleveland Barons that they released all their minor league players from their contracts. This left Simmer a free agent. The Los Angeles Kings took a flyer on Charlie Simmer, signing him to a 1-year deal with an option year. They were getting a big center who had increased his scoring totals in each of his pro seasons, and they got him for nothing. Simmer immediately jumped into a first-line role with the Kings' farm club, the Springfield Indians, and led the team with 42 goals. There, he played alongside Bob Berry, the most productive left-winger in Kings history at that point. Berry had been dispatched to the minors, ostensibly to learn the coaching ropes. The following season, Berry was named head coach of the LA Kings. For the 5th straight year, Simmer started in the minors. Outwardly, he expressed quiet patience, but inwardly, he battled discouragement and depression, not allowing himself to dwell on his situation. By January of 1979, Simmer was having a decent season in Springfield. But when Berry needed a guy who could slot into the Kings' top line, he recalled Simmer. Having played alongside Simmer all the previous season, Berry was uniquely suited to identify what Simmer could bring to the team. Simmer knew how to use his size for offensive advantage, throwing his weight around to scoop up loose pucks and then make a give-and-go play and crash the net. Simmer's first game back up with the Kings on January 13th is the stuff of legends. Berry put him on the top line with Marcel Dionne and Dave Taylor. Taylor dug pucks out of the corners and fed them to Dionne, who established possession, and Simmer was the net front presence the line had needed all along. The Dionne-Simmer-Taylor line took 12 shots that night and scored 5 goals. Dionne had a legacy night with 4 goals in the 7-3 victory over his former club, the Red Wings. And they did it against Rogie Vachon, the goalie who had abandoned them in the offseason. but that's a different story. The Kings had scored just once in the 3 games before Simmer's arrival. Simmer made an immediate impact. Over his first 9 games, he recorded 10 points while scoring in 9 straight. Marcel Dionne was held off the score sheet just 3 times the rest of the season. And even on those nights, Simmer and Taylor would pick up the slack. At least one of the trio scored in every single game to close out the year. By season's end, Simmer found his stride. In his final 9 games, he posted 10 goals and 10 assists. In time, they would be dubbed the Triple Crown line, and they would go down as one of the most successful in hockey history. Simmer would never face another minor league assignment again. That summer, Simmer signed a new contract with the Kings. At the time, he was happy with the deal. He was happy just to be out of the minors. It showed in his demeanor on and off the ice. He was never one to shy away from contact and was known to crack a smile after taking a good hit. In the locker room and on the bench, he was witty, relaxed, and well-liked. That year, Simmer registered the first of back-to-back 56-goal seasons, the first of which tied for the league lead. Simmer stayed humble and downplayed his accomplishments, joking that he was a garbage collector, banging in loose pucks around the goal mouth. His line mates disagreed. The 3 forwards complemented each other's styles perfectly. Each piece was essential to the line's success. Simmer's goal-mouth rummaging helped Dionne win the Art Ross Trophy as NHL scoring leader in 1980. As quick as things were happening on the ice, they were happening even faster off it. In mid-October 1980, Simmer and roommate Glenn Goldup attended a Doobie Brothers concert with Goldup's playmate girlfriend and her best friend Terry Wells. Terry was also a playmate. Her and Charlie hit it off. By December, he proposed. She said yes. That January, the NHL All-Star Game was held in the Great Western Forum, and Simmer, Dionne, and Taylor played together as a line to thunderous applause. Simmer, tall and handsome, an all-star with his playmate fiancée, who just 3 years earlier was mired in an often depressing, unappreciated existence in the minor leagues, was living a Hollywood fever dream. Then he caught a bad break. On a routine play in Toronto, he tried to turn and caught the tip of his skate blade on a rut in the ice. He crumpled immediately. A hospital visit revealed that he suffered a clean break of the fibula and a fracture of the tibia. His season was over. The Kings thought they could do real damage in the playoffs that year. They had 3 promising young blue liners, some complimentary scoring, an all-star goalie, and of course, the Triple Crown. Until they didn't. The Kings bowed out early again, reinforcing management's doubts about the lineup. Terry flew out to Toronto to visit Simmer, and the two got married months ahead of schedule. Doctors gave Simmer a year to return to the lineup. He did it in 8 months. Simmer came back sooner than anyone expected, but not as the same player. The leg had healed, with the help of 9 screws and a metal plate. But the timing and touch were off. He scored 15 goals in 50 games, then 29 the following season. Respectable numbers, but a far cry from the heights he had reached before the injury. By then, management had tinkered with the lineup, impatient with the results. They were a floundering team searching for footing in a crowded entertainment marketplace. What management failed to understand during that stretch was that the Triple Crown line was still something to build around. Simmer hadn't regressed. He was climbing again, once more proving himself to an organization that hesitated to believe in him. In 1983-84, the line was finally reunited full-time. Dave Taylor had been sidelined with a wrist injury for much of the previous season. The results were immediate. Simmer scored 44 goals and added 48 assists, leading the Kings in scoring and earning team MVP honors. That summer, Simmer wanted a new contract. He was still playing under a deal he'd signed before he was proven. He wasn't looking for a windfall, just recognition. He had been underpaid for years, playing through a maze of unsigned or rejected agreements. As the team's most productive winger and reigning MVP, he believed he had earned a modest raise. ownership disagreed. Jerry Buss was unwilling to renegotiate, and new general manager Rogie Vachon found himself stuck in the middle. With his wife Terry at his side, Simmer chose to wait for the team to show him he was wanted. Eventually, he reported to camp and appeared in 5 of the Kings' first 7 games. The situation, however, was beyond repair. Los Angeles failed to win any of the games Simmer played, and the uncertainty hung over the room. Vachon traded Simmer to the Boston Bruins for a first-round pick. Perhaps the Kings were trying to recoup the losses suffered when they traded their first to Boston in 1979. The Kings selected Dan Gratton. It was an abrupt and unfitting end to one of the great scoring lines in hockey history. In Boston, Simmer continued to produce, scoring 33, 36, and 29 goals in 3 seasons there. Though that sounds like a decline, it's actually an impressive number for a former 50-goal scorer in his early 30s. The average goal total for a former 50-goal scorer in his age 31 season is 28. For age 32, that number declines to 24. By age 33, the average former 50-goal scorer has a 22-goal season. With that in mind, Simmer's numbers don't look like decline. They look like near Hall of Fame level consistency. Simmer's slow-footed net front presence style of play was uniquely suited to resist such a decline. But he was eventually waived and picked up by Pittsburgh, where his NHL career came to a close. He played briefly in Germany and San Diego of the International League. The marriage to Terry didn't last, another reminder that the Hollywood chapter had been all too brief. He finished with 711 points in 712 games and 342 goals. It's tempting to wonder what might have happened if Charlie Simmer had been recognized earlier, if the Seals had understood what they had, if the detours had been fewer. He might have hit milestones that change how careers are measured. Or he might have been misused all over again, never meeting Bob Barry, never landing on Marcel Dion's left wing, never becoming Charlie Simmer at all. Sometimes the long way around is the only way it works.
Over the course of the history of the game, patterns emerge. Peaks, declines, trajectories, all tell stories. One story is about goalies who suddenly emerge into the spotlight for a moment of glory, then fizzle out, some quickly, some spectacularly. Others still don't fizzle out, but explode into stardom, though they're the exception. These players cast a long shadow and add the weight of anticipation to every goaltender's hot start, if they have one. Any discussion about goaltenders enjoying a hot start to their careers should begin with Ken Dryden. The legend goes, late in the 1971 season, the Montreal Canadiens had lost faith in their goalies Rogie Vachon and Phil Murr. So at the deadline to do so, they recalled untested rookie goalie Ken Dryden from their AHL affiliate. They put Dryden in for 6 of the remaining 11 games of the season, and he won all of them, only allowing 9 goals in the process. He had played so well that coach Claude Ruel made him the starting goalie throughout the playoffs. Dryden stopped the mighty Boston Bruins, the Minnesota North Stars, and Chicago Blackhawks in 3 hard-fought series to win the Stanley Cup. It became the quintessential hot start story in hockey lore. If he'd have started with the Habs at the beginning of the season, we'd remember him differently. But it's the mystique of the goalie who gets called up late in the year and goes on a spree that continues to captivate and inspire. The fact that Dryden went on to have such a peculiar and successful career makes hockey fans watch every meteoric rise through a certain filter. Nearly 20 years earlier, Jacques Plante also enjoyed somewhat of a similar hot start when he found himself backstopping a Habs team facing elimination in Game 6 against Chicago. He blanked them and held them to 1 goal in Game 7 to help Montreal to the final. He started the first 2 games of the final against Boston before regular starter Jerry McNeil returned to the lineup. The Habs won that year too, and Plante would later go on to carve out a legendary career.
So with that in mind, our story shifts to 1984 and a Montreal Canadiens head coach who had lost confidence in his goalies Rick Wamsley and Richard Sevigny. The club recalled untested minor league goalie Steve Penney late in the year. After 4 regular season appearances that were really apropos of nothing, coach Jacques Lemaire named Penney the starter for the playoffs. What followed was as surprising as it was familiar. Once again, the Canadiens faced Boston. In 3 games of a best-of-5 series, Penney allowed just 2 goals. He followed that by outdueling Quebec in 6, allowing only 5 goals in Montreal's 4 wins, including a shutout. In the conference final, Montreal faced the dynastic New York Islanders, owners of the previous 4 Stanley Cups, and still undefeated to that point. Penney shut them out in Game 1. In Game 2, he allowed only 2 goals in victory. By that point, Penney was 9-2 in the playoffs with a .938 save percentage and a .154 goals against average. This in the mid-1980s, the highest scoring era the league has ever seen. The series then shifted to Long Island, where the Islanders controlled play. Montreal's offense dried up, Penney regressed towards the mean, and the Islanders won 4 straight. But that wasn't the end of the story. The following season, Penney would be named the team's starting goaltender. His performance that year earned him a berth on the NHL's 1985 All-Rookie team alongside Mario Lemieux. That spring, he would once again win a playoff round with the Habs, but would bow out in the second. Next training camp, Penney lost the starter's job to 19-year-old phenom Patrick Waugh. Penney played 18 games that year as the backup before a knee injury ended his season. Later, rookie Waugh finished the job Penney had been unable to, becoming yet another young Canadiens goaltender to step into the crease and carry the team to a championship. Penney had his name left off the Stanley Cup engraving and was traded to Winnipeg in the offseason. He played 2 years in the Jets organization and retired in 1988. It was not the ending Canadiens fans had been accustomed to. It's tempting to look at Steve Penney's career and see a failure. Some fan theories suggest that Penney benefited from being an unknown and that it was only a matter of time before NHL shooters compiled a scouting report and knew where to attack him. But the numbers don't reflect that. What the evidence suggests is that Penney was an above-average goalie for his era, who was supplanted by a better one, then succumbed to a knee injury. Penney never fully recovered his career momentum after the injury, and it's debatable whether the opportunity to do so ever materialized in Winnipeg. As meteoric a rise and as sudden a fall as Penney had experienced, it was nothing compared to the wild ride of Andrew Hammond. A late-season emergency call-up in 2015, Andrew Hammond had been the third-string goalie for an Ottawa Senators team that looked destined to miss the playoffs. Hammond won his first game 4-2 against Montreal, then his second and third by shutouts. He was the NHL's Player of the Week. That was a great start, but he just kept going. NHL Player of the Month honors, tying league goaltending records with all-time legends. Hammond rode a wave of momentum that carried his entire team with it. By the season's conclusion, Hammond had compiled an astonishing 21-2 record, acquired an unforgettable nickname, and squeaked the Senators into the playoffs. The Hamburglar placed 7th in Vezina voting and 15th for the Hart. In the playoffs, Hammond was replaced as starter after 2 games, but during the offseason, Hammond signed a new contract. Hammond had turned an emergency call-up into a 3-year, $4 million deal. Inevitably, the run proved impossible to repeat, and Hammond struggled thereafter. He never truly found his footing again in Ottawa and was eventually dealt. He bounced around a little bit as a utility goalie before retiring in 2022. When taking an overview of Hammond's career, the mystery of the Hamburglar isn't why he fell off. It's how did he get on such a heater to begin with? One fan theory suggests Hammond's run was nothing more than a hot streak, and many are content to leave the matter at that. They may have a case. Other fan theories suggest that the new contract he signed after his hot streak came with too much pressure, or that because he had been an undrafted, unheralded goalie before his call-up, NHL shooters simply didn't know where his weak spots were, until they figured them out. This particular theory is a common thread throughout most goalie collapse narratives. Arguably, the most extreme example of the parabolic rise, sharp decline career curve was carved out by Jim Carey. By the time he was named the starting goalie for the Capitals in 1995, Carey already had the resume of a future superstar. First goalie taken his draft year, World Junior starter, top rookie and top goalie honors in the AHL. By the end of the 1996 season, he had added a Vezina trophy and an NHL first-team All-Star selection to his list of honors. What happened next was swift and brutal. The Capitals' first-round opponent that year was the high-powered Pittsburgh Penguins. Capitals coach Jim Schoenfeld tried to employ a starting goalie rotation between Carey and his backup Olaf Kolzig. The strategy didn't work. Carey was pulled in 2 of his 3 starts. By the time Schoenfeld had committed to Kolzig as his starter, it was too late, and the Capitals bowed out in 6. The next season was disappointing for Carey. His numbers weren't as good as the previous year, and he was dealt to a Boston Bruins team suffering through their worst season in decades. His counting numbers collapsed. Then, in a flash, he was out of hockey entirely 2 years later. Penny and Hammond were good examples of goalies who seemingly came from nowhere to take the hockey world by storm. Carey, on the other hand, came up through the ranks in the eye of that storm. The hockey world had every reason to believe that he would bounce back. What's shocking is that he didn't. So what happened? Theories about Jim Carey usually center around psychology rather than ability. Few doubted his physical ability to man the net. But one thing that's repeatedly suggested in Carey discussions is that his coaching staff, his teammates, and even Carey himself stopped believing in his ability to remain calm under pressure. This theory stands in conjunction with a complementary one which suggests that the trade to Boston was ruinous because of that market's strong demand to win, combined with a desperate need for steady goaltending. Therefore, it was impossible for Carey to steady his game under the intense scrutiny there. Another theory, like the Hammond contract theory, is that the expectations that came with a Vezina were too high to live up to. Another suggests Washington gave up on him too quickly because Kolzig was waiting in the wings. The truth probably orbits around the center mass of all of those theories. Jim Carey's career forces an uncomfortable question. What happens when a goalie does everything right, arrives exactly as planned, and still vanishes? That question would surface again 2 decades later, this time not after a Vezina trophy, but after 2 Stanley Cups. In our results-oriented consumerist culture, the bottom line in sports is, did they win? For Matt Murray, goaltender of the Pittsburgh Penguins, the answer was a resounding yes. And yet, for some, winning isn't enough. A second question then arises. What have you done for me lately? Like Penny and Dryden, Murray was a late-season call-up who wrestled the starter's job from an incumbent encircled by questions. Like Carey, he came with a pedigree, having put together an all-time great year in the AHL during the previous season. Like Dryden, when he arrived, he brought an eventual Stanley Cup victory with him, then another. By the second round of the 2018 playoffs, the Penguins had won 9 straight playoff series with Murray at the back end for most of 7 of them. Murray's early playoff win streak belonged in the same rarefied echelon as Tom Brady's in football. Then, finally, the Penguins lost to the Capitals, who would go on to win a championship of their own. Over the next few seasons, the winning was forgotten. Murray exhibited a perfectly normal career arc that swung between great seasons and average to below average. In Murray's case, the swings were wilder than the average goaltenders, which only seemed to crystallize negative opinion from vocal observers. Murray was also hurt quite often, playing through injuries or missing time during inopportune moments. Some fans debated whether Murray's emotive temperament and hyper-competitive personality was a help when things were going good, but a hindrance when facing superior challenges. Many also reasoned that Murray's early success was built on team structure and systems. When coaches and personnel left, a kind of security blanket left with them and Murray would be left exposed. Eventually he was traded, then demoted, though at the time of this recording he remains a presence in the NHL at times, and his story is not over as of yet. Up to this point, every example we've looked at shares a common feature: a sudden rise followed by a harsh reckoning with expectation. It would be easy to conclude that all these stories end the same way, that a hot start is a warning sign, not a promise. But hockey history isn't quite that neat. Not every goalie who experiences a sudden rise disappears beneath it. Some remain, some adapt. Some carve out long careers that, while never recapturing the heights of their beginnings, remain productive and respectable. Cam Ward and Jordan Binnington belong to this smaller group. Their stories complicate the picture. Like several of the goalies before them, both Ward and Binnington arrived suddenly, seized control of the net under extreme circumstances, and delivered a Stanley Cup almost immediately. In Ward's case, it came with a Conn Smythe trophy. In Binnington's, it came as the backbone of one of the most dramatic mid-season turnarounds in league history. In both cases, expectations were rewritten overnight. What followed, however, was not collapse. Neither vanished from the league, neither lost the job immediately. Instead, both settled into long NHL careers marked by volatility rather than failure. Strong seasons followed by ordinary ones, hot stretches offset by long plateaus. There were no encores, no Vezina seasons, no second championship runs, just long careers spent living in the shadow of an extraordinary beginning. Gunslingers living in the shadow of their own reputations. In that sense, Ward and Binnington may be the most revealing cases of all. Their stories suggest that what fans often interpret as decline is something quieter and more common: normalization. The rise was real, the expectations were enormous. The come-down was not failure, but contrast. Both remained starters for years. Both won hundreds of games. Both proved they belonged. Looking at these careers side by side, it becomes clear how early some stories are written, and how difficult it can be for a career to escape its opening chapter. Every now and then we get to witness a remarkable run from a fresh face, and it always feels exciting. Sometimes it's a prelude to greatness. At other times, it's just a moment. The thing about a grand entrance is that it creates expectations. Sometimes we mistakenly believe we can project how the book ends just by reading the opening chapter. Hockey is much more surprising than that.
Warning: all these stories are true, even the ones that contradict each other. Neil was a fugitive, a criminal. Just a few hours earlier, he'd been a professional hockey coach. His hands gripped the wheel of the rental car tightly. He checked the rearview mirror every couple of seconds, looking for red and blue flashing lights. Checking his speed not to draw attention to himself. A sea of red brake lights swam in front of him as he entered the city of Atlanta. He was coming from Birmingham, where a couple hours earlier he'd been coaching the New England Whalers. Things were getting a little too tame on the ice. A hockey game was breaking out. The Alabama hockey fans started shouting, "Bring on the Goons!" There was no team better suited to oblige the taste of the Birmingham crowd than the Minnesota Fighting Saints. Their coach was Harry Neal. But they were gone, and now Neal found himself behind the Whalers bench. Not too many goons there, not like the Fighting Saints. Anyway, it was Thanksgiving in Birmingham, and the fans had been verbally abusing the Whalers and their coach all night. When they started throwing things, it crossed the line. Neal grabbed a stick off the rack and started swinging it at his abusers. He got in a good whack or two, but accidentally hit a woman.
The police wanted to have a little chat with Neil after the incident. Next thing you know, he's rushing out the locker room and hailing a taxi to the rental car place, and, well, let's just say the woman eventually settled out of court. It was hard for someone who had survived the Fighting Saints to understand what was the big deal. Things got out of hand all the time back in St. Paul. Shaky was the best player for the Fighting Saints. On the ice, puck on his stick, he was a poem told in chopping strides. End-to-end rushes, dancing around defenders, 100 miles an hour. Then, boom, clapper from the face-off circle, glove side and in. The mesh ripples. 3,000 people lose their minds. Shaky was going to be a big star. Back in Toronto, they'd groomed him to be the replacement for Frank Mahovlich, who didn't really like the spotlight. It didn't quite work out that way, but don't tell Shaky that. Loose puck through the neutral zone, open ice, nobody between Shaky and the goalie. He's got a head of steam, legs chopping, dancing again. This is what he lives for. He touches the puck. The whistle blows. Shaky looks over his shoulder. His teammate, Gord Gallant, is drifting to the penalty box. Shaky slaps his stick on the ice, button hooks towards the box, starts yelling. The whole building can hear him, every word, cussing out his own teammate. When the penalty's over, Gallant skates back to the bench and beats hell out of Shaky in front of everyone. The ref wants to call a penalty on the Fighting Saints for the fight. Neil said, "There's no rule against two teammates fighting." The ref thinks about it for a minute and says, "Well, you got a point there." Shaky got treated differently. Everyone knew it. It drove some guys nuts. Others just shrugged. That was the deal. He'd be all in some game days, just a rumor with a shadow on others. If you weren't one of the first guys at the bank to cash your check, forget it. Veterans showed up late for practices on payday. Shaky wouldn't even park with the other players. Every now and then, Neil would pick him up personally. No woodshed speeches, no paperwork, just a drive and a conversation. Most nights it didn't change much, but every once in a while it worked. And on those nights, Shaky could do it all. Of course, some nights he did too much. One night, they said, he fought his own teammate on the ice. Like this sort of thing happened all the time. One other night, rumor has it, things weren't going his way, so he up and skates off the ice in the middle of the period, right past the locker room, and just kept going. They found him after the game at the bar, still in his skates and uniform. Things got out of hand sometimes in St. Paul. But that's not how it happened. It went like this. It actually happened in South Chicago. The whistle blew, and Neil's reaction was immediate. Protest, hot under the collar. 1 foot up on the top of the boards, leaning in and really giving it to the refs. Then the fans got on him. The banging on the glass, the laughter, the smart comments. Banging becomes pushing. Pushing gets too close for comfort. So Neil pushes back. Now more fans pile in, pushing against the glass. Now a couple Saints players are pushing back with Neil. Before you know it, it's a seesaw battle. Someone grabs a stick and starts swatting it over the top of the glass. Then another stick. And another. In one regular old game in San Diego, this guy was chirping Shaky all night. Now you've got to remember, in San Diego, they've got chicken wire instead of plexiglass along the end boards. There's a scrum in the corner and the guy gets a little too close. He's got his face pressed right up against the chicken wire, talking smack. Shaky lets him have it. Bunk, with the butt end of the stick. The guy got back up with a red rectangle stamped across his forehead. The case got dismissed. The judge agreed that guy was crazy. Some of the veteran players knew to keep the car running on payday. The boss would sign the check, hand it over with a solemn look. Guys had about 20 minutes tops to get to the bank, and if there was a lineup when you got there, look out. On road trips, some of the older guys, the staff and veterans, would peel into a dark corner and chip in for lunch to feed the guys who hadn't got paid yet. They'd be out there promoting scrimmages, radio spots, meet and greets. Tickets sold well, but never as many as they needed. Then the bank would call. So you dig in and shake a few more hands before the next game. Just keep kicking that can down the road. 20 minutes west, the North Stars were at the peak of their popularity. Shaky could light them up. Cheech could hang with their snipers. Other than that, the Fighting Saints had what the North Stars didn't, a little muscle in the lineup. Every year, Glenn Sonmore would challenge the North Stars to an all-Twin Cities exhibition match. And every year, the North Stars would glance down and politely decline. They were always a little more Edina, while the Fighting Saints were always a little more East St. Paul. What actually happened was the coach was walking to the players' bench with Goldie. There was a police barricade holding back the crowd. Those fans in Houston were rowdy. One guy kind of breaks the cordon and gets close enough for Goldie to get a mitt on him. Whack! The guy's out cold. The whole place loses it. The mob pushes in, the cops are pushing back. Coach and Goldie are ducking, dodging, and swinging wildly as they get surrounded. Finally, the cops broke everything up and escorted them to the Saints bench. Goldie smirked when he looked over his shoulder and saw the police trying to revive the guy so they could arrest him. Or was it that time in Cleveland where a fan dumped beer on Neil? They always did that in Cleveland. Most guys would just smart off and tell the fans to pick a better brand, but not Neil. He charged into the stands and went right after the guy. Some of the players went in there with him too. But that one fan never charged Bill Butters for biting him on the hand. And the sticks? Pie McKenzie's skating by the Saints bench. He looks right at Harry Neal and makes a rude comment. Just spits it out with venom. Without hesitating, Neal calmly turned around, grabbed a stick, and started swinging it in Pie's face. McKenzie didn't back down either. He went right over to Neal and they started fighting. Then the benches cleared. 8,000 people went crazy. There were a few times when things got out of hand in St. Paul. He let the phone ring. Almost definitely going to be someone who wanted money anyway. He cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. He decided then and there he was going to the airport. The flight was booked for the next game. There was somebody, a truck driver apparently, who was going to buy the team. He'd at least agreed to support everybody through the weekend. It was a sorry turnout at the airport. Just a handful of players. Shaky and Cheech were there, and Harry Neal. They were expecting more. Not enough to make a team and carry on. Guess the rest just gave up on believing. Or maybe they just ran out of money. Those who did show up voted right there on the spot to fold the team. That way, everybody could sign somewhere else and pick up a couple paychecks before the season ended. Rest of the guys found out in the newspapers the next day, if they weren't out of town by then already.